And that takes us to our final album, Combat Rock
Mm-hmm.
by The Clash.
All right. I will run the
Matt.
numbers and then you get the first take here. So, Combat Rock by The Clash comes in at number 123 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 11 in 1982, number 827 of all time. It is The Clash's fourth highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind Sandinista, the self-titled album The Clash, and London Calling, all albums that we've covered before. And The Clash are ranked number 29 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
So this has always been to me in some ways. I know it's weird to say this because you're talking about a band that has a triple album and all these mishmash styles. It's hard to say it, but this has always been the hardest Clash album for me to peg because the other ones kind of have their thing, right? Like the Clash, the initial one is just it's the vibrancy where it pops out. It there's an energy and a vitality to it, as well as that interesting mix of the punk with the amateurish nature of it, but also their ability to be so melodic and tight at times. They're just confounding. I know that some people might say it sounds a little bit samey at times, but it doesn't for me, especially in the context of when it was released, when it's just so different. Give them enough rope is like pretty much the same new verse, same as the first, right? But there's still really strong songs on that album, and there's variations they do with genre shifting there that they really get into. They break it up. London Calling to some degrees the masterpiece. Sandinista is the one where if you're able to strip it down because it's so unwieldy, you realize there's like a really great, as we said, really great 12 song album, a really good double album at about 20 songs, and then you kind of just want to peel the other ones off. But the quality is unquestioned, and it's interesting because of just how it's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Combat Rock is so interesting to me because you immediately see, I think by this point Topper Heaton's gone, if I remember correctly, from the band. I think he'd been fired, and so the drums definitely sound different on this album. Now, whether that's he's playing differently or he's not there or he's there for bits and pieces, right? And so it's not consistent. I'll have
It
to.
says he's on the personnel here on
It's
Wikipedia.
on the personal. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's there's a difference in the drumming on this album. At times, I like it as much as any of the drumming that's been on a Clash album. At times, it's shockingly the drums disappear in a way they rarely ever do. This album always has seemed to me like you can hear the tension of the band because Mick Jones and Joe Strummer are writing such different songs on this album, and it's like they're battling for the soul of the band. It feels like to some degree. Um, I always have found this album to be maddeningly inconsistent because the highs are extremely high. Obviously, pretty much everybody knows "Rock the Casbah," which is an unquestionable great pop song. The cover of "Should I Stay or Should I Go" is a classic. I've loved "Ghetto Defendant." Really plays into styles I like. "Car Jamming," the second song, is one of those songs that um, it's just so unique. It resonates with me. And then "Know Your Rights" is a great opener, but there is a little bit of drag on the back end of this album. There's a little bit of a lack of cohesiveness on this album that I think is apparent, especially as the album goes on. I think it starts to sputter a little bit at the end. It's never bad, but it doesn't have the vitality that even the songs that miss by the Clash on earlier albums have. They sound like a tired band. Way back when, I remember we did that album Beatles for Sale, right, Matt? And we said the Beatles just sound tired on this album, lyrically, thematically. It's a good album, but
Yeah.
it just sounds tired. They need a break. And I get a little bit of that fatigue feel on Combat Rock. Not enough to not make this a thumbs up, right? But because the Clash are a great band, and even at their worst, although we didn't cover cut the crap, so maybe I shouldn't say that. But like the vintage Clash, right? Even at their worst, can turn around a pop song sort of effortlessly in their own way. But it is a little bit frustrating and a little sad because you do see that they really they don't ever come back from this. They do one more album and they don't reunite. They let bygones be bygones a little bit, but this represents sort of the last gasp for the Clash. I know, if I remember correctly, this is the Clash album that sold the best in America.
Hmm.
And I know because it has two massive singles. And as much as what would be considered to not be a music aficionado like knows the Clash offhand, right? They're gonna know "Should I Stay or Should I Go" and "Rock the Casbah," right? That's gotta be
Yeah.
the two songs that more casual listeners would know from
Yep.
the Clash. I know people might say, "Oh, London Calling," but I'm like, no, London Calling doesn't resonate in the mainstream like "Should I Stay or Should I Go" or "Rock the Casbah" does, and part of that's because they're really tightly constructed, groovy songs that have a real pop element. And are of their time for 1982, 1983 as well. And of course, Rock the Casbah has a weird but memorable video, right, with the
Yeah.
armadillo, and they're in the oil
Yeah.
field in the Middle East, and there's I think like Joe Strummer's in the yellow shirt, and they're playing. There's the sheiks and I think it's supposed to be the shahs, right? That they're saying, but they're just sort of moving around. So that was one of the early videos I remember on MTV. So, what do you think of this one, Matt?
Yeah, I'm well. First of all, I want to say that you're right. I'm looking this up here. It is their highest selling album. It reached
Hmm.
double platinum in the U.S. and reached
And
number
it
two
makes
in the U.K.
sense.
Yeah, and Topper Heaton was on this record, but he was pretty in a pretty deep heroin addiction. So if he was not
Well,
playing
you
what
could
he,
tell he's not himself on this
yeah.
because he doesn't. It's not bad. It's just different.
Mm.
So, and I know that he's on his way out of the band at this point. So I wasn't sure if he was gone or just inconsistent.
Yeah. But I think I agree with a lot of what you said. I found this album fairly inconsistent. And I agree that it's mostly on the second half. Particularly songs like Sean Flynn and Death is a Star.
Hmm.
I was struggling to find any cohesive aspect of either of them. I'm like, are these songs? This sounds like it's yeah, kind of, but it's almost like they're just playing around in the studio, threw it together, and was like, all right, just put it on there. I was struggling to find identity with some of these songs. And I will say, like, I think should I stay or should I go and Rock the Casbah are particularly should I stay or should I go do suffer from that like over familiarity. I think Rock the Casbah is a solid track. Should I stay or should I go has always been a song. It's like like it's fine. I guess I get, but I never got the mass appeal. There's plenty of other Clash songs and singles that I would rather hear than that. So even their stronger or their more popular songs on this record are not some of my favorite Clash songs. They're perfectly, they're fine, but it didn't really. Yeah, there's nothing on here that really stands out a ton. I mean, I did like "Know Your Rights." That probably I like the way that opens. I didn't know
I
that song as
I
well.
will say "Rock the Casbah" I think is one of those songs because you've heard it so often,
Yeah.
you may not process it. I compare it a lot, Matt, to Love Shack, where because you've heard it so many
Hmm.
times, you might not understand how good a song it is because
Yeah.
it's just like, well, what's Rock the Casbah? Oh, it's Rock the Casbah. And you're not processing it like as a song because it's
Yes.
just always been there. So I will push back a little bit on that Rock the Casbah is
I
just sort of standard issue because it is a very, very unique song in its own way, and it doesn't sound a lot like other Clash songs. Whereas, like, Should I Stay or Should I Go, there's five or six other Clash songs I could give you, like, that sound like that, but are better versions of it, even though I do like that song,
yeah.
and I don't. I know what you're saying about it being
Well,
overplayed,
let me put it
right?
this way: when I first listened to this earlier in the week, I saw those two songs back to back. I was like, okay, right. And as I listened more to it, I saw more into Rock the Casbah. I don't, not as much as I saw the differences or appreciation more for like something like Love Shack. But yeah, I was listening to that more than I had ever before, really, or just like because I was paying more attention to it probably. So yes, that one stood out a little bit, certainly more than Should I Stay or Should I Go, which I don't know if the needle moved at all for me on that one, but I do see what you're saying there. Um, this is something else that I learned too. Straight to Hell. That's where MIA's Paper Planes comes from.
Yes.
I
Oh, you
was
didn't
like,
know
oh
that?
nope, didn't know that. So,
Okay.
and I was kind of like, all right, it's hard to hear that opening part without without expecting MIA to come in. But and it's kind of that was interesting too because they did that part and then the rest of the song they only did it maybe once again, so that was not an integral main part of that song, which was kind of interesting to me. But yeah, Straight to Hell, a little repetitive, a little long. I thought Overpowered by Funk was an interesting song. That was like a that sounded like Talking Heads to me.
It sure
um
did. It was like the Clash doing Talking Heads.
yes, and so when
Yep.
I heard that, I put that together. I was like, yeah, okay, this is I'm kind of grooving to this a little bit more. So that was more upbeat and energized. It's got
There's a
like
lot
the
of world music element. Car
yeah,
jamming has a
yeah,
world music element too.
yeah, but this was kind of more of that, kind of how the when the Talking Heads took that the African drumming and like the sped up African drumming and um, you know that was more apparent there, a lot more energy. I thought. I liked the bass part in Ghetto Defendant. I thought that that was a really good groove that they found there. It's kind of like it's like this. It's kind of like a reggae kind of vibe that's happening there, but there's a cool. I do like the bass part. So that's another song. There's like a spoken part. I'm looking at it here. Apparently, it was Allen Ginsberg that was kind of doing some of the spoken word parts on that. That's another thing I wasn't too thrilled about was some of these parts where people are just speaking, and I know it's it just musically it's not really resonating with me. So there are parts in here that I liked, but I did find it yeah, inconsistent again, particularly in the second half. Adam Tan, that was fine. It didn't really stand out to me.
I
Red
do like Inoculated City and Ghetto
okay.
Defendant. I think that's a two
Ghetto
song.
Defendant inoculates, yes. Red Angel, Dragnet, okay.
Yeah,
You know,
well, that's reggae. That's more my lean than yours. It's
yeah,
got the reggae element.
that
Yeah,
tracks.
so I always like that song.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I like car jamming not as much as you. That was fine. So yeah, inconsistent's a good way to put this. And because there wasn't anything I, I think the best I could do here is the thumbs in the middle. To be honest, I don't know if I would ever go back to this. There's other. I think all the other Clash albums, even like I agree with you. Even Sandinista, as bloated as that album is, there is a lot more for me to sink my teeth into on that record. And I didn't. I guess I don't really know a whole lot of the history of the Clash or what's going on. I mean, so that corollary that you're making with Beatles for Sale and just how they're tired and maybe not getting a
Well,
lot
that
of
was still
attention.
early Beatles, but this is the end of the Clash. This
Right.
is like the breakup album,
But the
basically.
idea being that they're just kind of, they're not at their best. They're kind of there's issues that they're dealing with and whatnot. I think that tracks here because it comes out that way at least. And there's some stuff in here that it just seems like I'm not saying that they were, but it seems like they were phoning some stuff in here.
Yeah, I don't know if they're phoning it in, but I don't think they were all the way creatively there on some of the songs.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me that you felt that way because I knew I was going to be a little higher on it, but I knew you were going to be like, I didn't love this one, and try to do it. I think the only thing that surprises me is I would not have thought you were as down on Rock the Casbah as you. I'm much higher on that as like a top tier Clash song. And
Yeah.
I have always really thought that that's one of those songs I say is like an evergreen song for me that like you could play it for me like 100 times and I'll always like it. I would say it's even though some people might say it's overplayed or what, I
Hmm.
still immediately recognize it as one of the Clash's 10 best songs. Like and it's I'll go to the
Yeah.
a lot White Ride and Career Opportunities and I'm So Bored with the USA. There's some of the other ones that fall right, but um Train in Vain, right? But like Rock the Casbah is like right there with
Yeah.
them for
And
me.
and I do think it stands out as it's a unique song for sure. I think I like it
Well, that
more.
groove is
Yeah.
what it really appeals to me about that song. That ding 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 ding. Like
Down,
it's just
down.
such a great
Yeah.
groove. And
And I
me and a bass line,
and I
like
like it. And I
I'm
do
there.
like it more than I did coming into it. But yeah, those that it just never stood out to me. It's like I love that song. It was always like that's fine. I like it. It just
What
I've never felt that way about that song.
one
So it
thing
was
I
hard
will
for me
say
to
is that
change that in 1 week.
by this point, Paul Simon can play the bass.
Hmm.
Like I know early he was sort of like a non-factor, just learning. By this, he's as good a part of the band as anything,
Yeah.
which is sort of like a great evolution because it's sort of like here's the guy who largely just looks good and he'll just be, that's basically right. You know, it's like
Yeah.
he's like sort of the style, you know, the Andy Warhol, you know, let's have an aesthetic to the band. And by this point, he's playing these tasty ass bass lines, you know, all over this album.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
do want to mention
and it looks like Topper Heaton actually has writing credit on Rock the Casbah.
that. Yep.
So that's the, so he, in his heroin infused haze, he still was able to contribute to that song. So, so yeah, I think I'm probably more of a thumbs in the middle on this record. If I'm listening to the Clash, I'm certainly listening to, you know, particularly I think there's the self-titled debut album and London Calling. I think were my favorite Clash albums, and I definitely I liked you know, Give 'Em Enough Rope and Sandinista. I think we talked about this before. It's like let me pick and choose. You know, there's still plenty of stuff on there that was really good. This one was just, yeah, I felt a little flat. I was a little disappointed. I was hoping to like it more.
Gotcha. Yep. It doesn't surprise me because I think we share some aspects of it, but I didn't look at it as a disappointment. It's more, to me, it's a lost opportunity, and I look at it as a moment in time too. I think they probably
But wouldn't that
might
be a
maybe should have
disappoint?
taken a step.
Wouldn't that be a disappointment though for one of your, maybe your favorite band of all time to have an album, you know, that's just, yeah, that could have been better. There was a lot more
Yeah.
potential there, and it was squandered. So
Well,
it's got to
and
be a little disappointing.
yeah, and I think one of the things that's been interesting is I've long answered the Clash as my favorite band of all time, and they still are one of my top tier bands. But I'm starting to realize, you know, that they might not be at the top of my heap. There's some
Mm.
other bands that I find a little bit more consistent across the board, and that might be right now what is pushing them down a little bit, in the sense that the top level of that consistency across the board. um you know, we covered the Replacements this week, another favorite band, and they share similar top tier peaks,
Hmm.
right, where they're just there. And I would say the Clash are a little bit more consistent than the Replacements in totality of their career, but the top albums, right, the Replacements are probably more consistent on.
Hmm.
And then I compare them to someone else I love, like an REM, right, who probably throughout the 80s and the
Yeah.
90s, right, is a more consistent band. So then I start evaluating and I go, well, how much of an effect does the REM career from like 98 to 2005, where there's moments of genius in there and albums that I think are a little underrated but not great,
Yeah.
how much does that pull them down? Or do I just look at the fact that for like 15 years they were just, so it's
Yeah.
interesting because I think at the end I'm gonna have such an idea, right, of who stands the test of
And
time.
and the answer will be whatever feels, whatever makes the most sense for you, you know, like
Well, and
however you.
also the fact that I listened to the almost the whole discography of the Clash, where there's others that I'm only hearing their peaks, right? And
Yeah.
so there aren't many artists that we've done who have 5+ albums that we've heard their whole discography. Even somebody like David Bowie that we covered a lot. There's wide swaths that we're not covering, and there's even 3 albums in the 70s we didn't cover.
But I still, and I think too that I would say that as far as criteria for your favorite artist or whatever, I, I think that it's, you can still make the argument that it's okay if there's not consistency, you know,
Hmm.
like with someone like a David Bowie or a Neil Young or a Bob Dylan or a Bruce Springsteen, people that kind of like people love and like are revered and stuff, and they have plenty of stuff that they're trying. You too, right? They're trying to. REM's got some
Right.
clunkers, you know. It's like they're trying to do something and it doesn't fit right and it doesn't work out. But like, you know what? Hey, they tried something different and they're gonna go back to the drawing board again. So it's hard to have artists that like never slipped up, like, you know,
Well,
like
it's
that.
also like, you know, the Beatles I think are held up as, right, the one
Yeah.
group that didn't have the huge miss,
I mean,
right?
even Beatles for Sale, which I get. I don't know if I forget where that was in my
Well,
rankings,
Let
but
It Be for me was a little bit
yeah,
more inconsistent than most, right? And I mean, don't get me wrong, they're probably my answer of who's the most consistent. But then, of course, the question becomes, do you can you hold somebody who only recorded albums for 6 years to the same standard as somebody who recorded albums
yeah.
for 12
Well, right.
and in their peak 6 years was also not releasing anything that wasn't elite? So, like, is that the standard I have to go? Like, if the Beatles
Yeah.
carried into 1975, because I think we
Yes.
saw McCartney did a lot of shit you know, like in
They
the
would have,
early,
yeah.
yeah,
If they were around long now, in that 6 years, they did do like 2 albums a year, so
right,
there is that. But so they have a ton of material,
yeah.
and then all the singles that never made it to albums. But I think your point is taken. If they stayed together and if they lasted another 6 or 8 years, I'm sure there would have been some clunkers in there.
Or would it have been
Like
inconsistent, right? Like we would
right,
have got
yes,
really good George
yeah,
Harrison stuff
right,
because he just had it, but we would have gotten like Primal Scream, John Lennon, the
yeah,
stuff he felt was big, but was the lesser stuff of the Lennon albums we covered, and like McCartney 1, where it's like, oh my God, this is like McCartney without any editing.
yeah.
And we would say, well, the Harrison tracks are great, and they threw in, a couple, but, they just seem a little bit fractured. The question is that's what's happened. Because that's kind of what happened with Let It Be. So,
Yeah.
so
And
and
that's one of the reasons why they can hold that if you want to
yes,
hold that mantle is because it's like lightning in the bottle. Perfect. They got in, they got out, right
yeah.
timing, and perfect. Like just enough, right? They left you wanting more. They didn't overstay their welcome, all that stuff, and it's hard to do, right? Most bands do not fit that
But
category.
say
So
the Stones had started at
yeah,
Aftermath and
right.
ended at like Sticky or Exile.
Exile, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean that's a
yes,
6 year period, and
yep,
it's like would we be? And then they just stopped.
right,
Like and that's why it's always so tough to do it
correct.
because it's the Beatles. I give them credit; they kind of realized. Well, they either realized or just Kismet said, "Time for you to
Well, they
stop,"
were
and we're gonna.
close. They had
Yeah,
like a contract written up that was like, okay, their next album would be like McCartney and Lennon and Harrison all get 3 or 4 songs, and Ringo gets 2. That's what they were gonna. The next album, had they done it, like that's basically where they were going, and they were gonna be just doing basically all solo stuff, and then recording them as Beatles. So it would have been a bunch of solo stuff, and you're probably right. They got out at the perfect time. Is really
yeah,
what happened.
and there's
Yeah,
an art to that.
yeah,
So well, anyway, so yeah, so I would give this a slight thumbs up. It sounds like you're more thumbs in the middle,
yeah.
trending down.
I don't know if I would say trending because there's stuff, like I said, there's stuff on here that I like, but I just think there's stuff on here. I think inconsistent is a good way to put it. It's almost half and half, so that's kind of thumbs in the middle. So I'm not feeling strongly one way or the other about it. It's just a little disappointing for me because I was hoping to like it more.
I understand. Yep. So